thanks everyone for joining. My name is Tiara Durham, and I'm the founder of Colors of COVID. And Colors of COVID is a village for people who have stories that they want to share about their experiences with COVID and how it's affected them, specifically for communities of color. And this is a part of my speaker series, That COVI Life, where we focus on sharing those stories of people, their experiences, and learning about ways that we can support each other through some of the challenges that we face with COVID. So today I'm joined by two really wonderful people. Tammy Curry, sorry, Tammy, is a great friend of mine. She's a caregiver, which is our topic for today, really understanding and navigating the challenges of caregivers when faced with the COVID-19 pandemic. So Tammy, I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about your story as a caregiver and some of your experiences over the last 18 months. And then we'll also turn to Deborah Jackson, who is the founder of HC3D, which is a company focused, a nonprofit organization focused on helping caregivers in a three-dimensional way. And so we'll hear from Deborah, learn more about her expertise in working with caregivers and how she supports them. And she's also a caregiver herself, so I'm sure there's some wonderful stories and anecdotes that she can share. But this is really about bringing awareness and raising awareness to caregivers, specifically in communities of color, and how the pandemic has impacted them. So I'm so looking forward to hearing from both of them. So Tammy, please tell us a little bit something about yourself. And I'm really interested in knowing about your experience as a caregiver for your mother, and how you've managed that heading into the pandemic, and how it has played out over the last 18 months.
Hi, Tia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm a caregiver for my mom, and it's been really difficult because not only am I a caregiver, but she has home health aides that come in as well. So I have to manage them. And my mom, she's diagnosed with early dementia, congestive heart failure, and the fall risk. So early on in March of 2020, I really started getting concerned listening to the news. The numbers was going up, seniors was in the nursing homes passing away, and all I could think about is keeping my mom safe. And the only way I knew how to do that at the time is to wash our hands, have everybody that come in the house wear masks and deodorize, even her grandkids and family members, everybody had to wear a mask. I also knew that I had to clear my schedule so I could kind of like be with my mom 24/7 because she needs 24 hours help, support. So by the time I cleared my schedule, one of the home health aides worked COVID and my brother was the first one that started getting symptoms. After my brother received the symptoms, he went and stood in line for like 5 hours and was tested. And once he was tested, 2 days later, the test came back and he tested positive. My mom started getting sick and then I followed. It was a dark time at that time because even though all the preparation we did to stay safe, we still didn't stay safe. So by the time my schedule was clear, we was all sick, but I didn't have time to think about myself because my mom and brother I had to take care of. And I didn't want, my mom was so sick, but I was giving her soup, I was giving her water, I was doing everything I could. And then she was getting weaker and weaker. It was really, really scary. And my brother was like, look, we got to send mom to the hospital. I didn't want to send her to the hospital, but she was dehydrated. And because she was dehydrated, I let her, my brother called 911 and they came and they took her to the hospital. As y'all know, nobody could go in or anything. However, it ended up being a lesson because I was able, she went in on a Friday. I was able to get rest that weekend and take care of myself and was able to heal. So by Saturday, my mom kept calling and calling and calling. So I asked the nurse to put her on FaceTime. And the nurse put her on FaceTime, and for the duration of her stay, I stayed on FaceTime, and then she felt safe because she didn't feel safe in the hospital. And then I was able to tell her what to eat and all of that stuff, and they took good care of my mom. However, come Monday, I chose against the doctor's orders to take my mom back out the hospital because she had been getting fluids for the last, from Friday to Monday, and I felt like she could come home. So we went and we picked her up from home, and it went uphill from there. We started getting better. Symptoms we had, just really, we took little things that people told us to take that's going to make us feel better and breathe and open up the room. And we just started getting better, and it became pretty good uphill. Everybody ended up being okay, but it was a really, really stressful period because we definitely had to keep the house shut down for a couple of months. And it was just me taking care of my mom with my brother here.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I know personally how it feels to get COVID, and it's not easy. And I'm always amazed at, you know, when you don't know what's wrong with you, somehow you push through, and then you find out I had this debilitating disease, you know, brought on by COVID-19, and it's you know, like you said, a blessing in disguise that you were able to get some rest while your mother was in the hospital, and she was able to come back, and all of you were able to recover, which is a blessing.
Yes.
So I know that when we talked, you mentioned a lot about the thought process that you had in deciding to get vaccinated. And unfortunately, a topic that shouldn't be controversial at all, shouldn't be political at all, has turned into, you know, daily discussions, right? The kind of discussion you don't want to talk about over the Thanksgiving dinner because you might, you know, two people might get a little too upset with each other. So Tammy, can you tell us a little bit about the thought process that you went through, and some of the challenges and things that you were battling with in deciding to get your vaccine, and ultimately what led to your decision to get vaccinated?
Against my better judgment, I did not want to get vaccinated. I don't trust the government. I felt the last 5 years, I knew something like this was going to happen because of the Ebola virus that, to me, President Obama at the time stopped it. And so when this came up overseas, it was just so scary because I thought something like this was going to happen anyway. And I believe some of the theories that I heard, which is still not proven, that it could be man-made. I took that under consideration. And I just really don't trust the government at all. But the one thing that I had to do was go and deep down in meditation with the higher power. And I had to get guidance, I had to meditate, and I had to ponder. And I decided that this is bigger than me. I had to think about my mom and other family members around me, and I love to travel. So just if that was right, when it was time to travel, I would be vaccinated so I could go off and see about my dad in Florida, because normally I take care of my dad too, back and forth. And during the COVID, I couldn't get down there to take care of my dad. And that was really, really difficult, that I had to depend on other people to take care of my dad while I was here taking care of my mom.
I can completely identify with that. My parents are in South Carolina, and it was so hard to not be able to get there and help them to make sure that they were okay. So I had explicit instructions, and I could only hope and pray that they were going to follow my instructions.
Yeah.
I even had groceries delivered at their house, which they didn't think was possible, because I'm in Philadelphia and they're in South Carolina, but we managed through it. And I remember how many times you spent traveling back and forth to Florida. So I know that must have been a really difficult time for you. And then my last question is really not a question, but an opportunity for you to share a little bit about what you would tell people who have been in your similar position, either from a caregiving perspective or from a position of trying to decide whether or not to get the vaccine. If you had a soapbox to stand on and tell them something, what would you tell them?
Funny you should ask that, because I had just a caregiver, that home health aide that helps take care of my mom. She didn't want to get vaccinated. And I just had to tell her, either she get vaccinated or we would have to find someone else to cover for my mom. And I gave her some advice to ponder on it. Think about others. Do your research. Don't listen to what you're hearing. Research it for yourself. And the most forefront, get in a corner by yourself and ask God. Because I believe God send us, even though they don't, I respect the reasons why they don't want to get vaccinated. At the same time, the statistics show millions of people got vaccinated, and everybody is still, a lot of people, it's okay. I believe that they just need to ponder.
Yes, yeah.
To go and what they should do.
Excellent point. So do your research. Don't listen to everything you hear, but do your own research. And when all else fails, even though you should start with it, if you haven't done it, get in the corner and ask your higher power for some direction and guidance. Those are wonderful words to part with. Thank you so much, Tammy. I hope you have an opportunity to stay with us, but if you have to leave, I wanted to at least let you know that I thank you so much for sharing your story. And I look forward to catching up soon. Like this is one of my lunch buddies. And so when we get an opportunity and it's safe, we're going to get back together and have our lunches. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to it, and I'll stay on.
Thank you. Thank you. So now I want to talk with Deborah Jackson a little bit. If we go way back, I'm not going to get into that, but it's a wonderful legacy of friendship. I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about caregiving from an expert's point of view, because there's the blend, the professional side of what Deborah does, and then there's also the fact that she's a caregiver herself, so she has a close connection to people who are impacted and who are caregiving. So Deborah, tell us a little bit about your personal and professional experience related to caregiving, and also you specialize in Alzheimer's and dementia care. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good to see everyone and all those people that will come on board a little later or see our talk even after today. But it's such a relevant conversation to have, talking about caregiving and COVID. And the caregiving journey for most people is not a journey that happens in a planned, orderly fashion. It is usually a crisis that takes place or something unexpected that happens that seems to kind of throw all of your plans off in order for everybody to come together, or in my case, one person to get it together and make the decisions necessary. And COVID surely did not make that journey any easier. For me, my journey started in 2010. And it started over a pot of gumbo in my Charlotte, North Carolina kitchen. My mother would visit me everywhere I lived, and we would spend holidays together. And part of what we did was she would come in town and she would bring ingredients from New Orleans, and we would get together and get ready to make our pot of gumbo. And this particular time, she came in town, she was unpacking her suitcase and began to take things out, and she had a piece of foil, and in the piece of foil, she was opening the foil, and inside the foil was bay leaf that we would put in the gumbo. And she opened the foil, and it was seconds. That's how quickly it came, and that's how quickly it left. She looked in the foil and did not know what the bay leaf was. And it was different than her looking in the foil and not remembering what she put in it. And so for seconds, she did not know what it was. And just as quickly as it came, it left. And that was literally the story of how my life began to shift into me becoming a caregiver. And obviously it wasn't overnight that I am where I am today. But as I said, it usually starts with some signal or something that happens. And it's not just dementia. It could be any situation where a person is caring for a young child, or someone has an accident, and all of a sudden a family member or a mother or father becomes a caregiver. And COVID is something that, in any situation like it, but COVID is something that was so traumatic to everyone's life in the sudden impact of how people live their lives, that for caregivers, it really became an additional point of crisis. So that's how my story started. I started as a dementia caregiver in that situation, and now it's been 11 years that I've been on this journey with my mom. I've since relocated from Charlotte, North Carolina, to move in and live with my mother here in New Orleans.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I've never heard anyone talk about that moment when they knew that something was off. But it's interesting. I mean, that's something that would be helpful for a lot of people to know, that in a split second, it could be the beginning of something that is going to change your life, just not necessarily the life of the person who experienced it, but also the person who was there when it happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
I imagine that COVID has really played a role in the life of families and communities, especially those who are caring for others. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of COVID on caregivers?
Yeah, and first I'll just start certainly just orienting people to the impact of caregiving in this country. It's really hard to not also mention Alzheimer's in the mix with caregiving, because of the rate. It is the fastest growing disease in this country. And as a result, it is now the 6th leading cause of death in this country. More people die of Alzheimer's than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. And so at the rate that Alzheimer's is growing, then the rate of caregiving is now also accelerating. And is it me that's frozen, or is everyone frozen? Oh, okay, good.
You're not frozen anymore.
Everyone, okay. So what I was saying, I'm not sure the last thing that you guys heard, but I was saying that it's hard to talk about caregiving without also mentioning Alzheimer's, because it is the fastest growing disease in this country. The sixth leading cause of death, more people are dying of Alzheimer's than prostate and breast cancer combined. So my point is, because of the rate of Alzheimer's, we also now have a greater acceleration of caregiving that is happening within the country. And so caregiving, just from a general standpoint, we have 43 million people in this country that are family caregivers. And so when you talk about caregivers, you have formal caregivers and informal caregivers. Your formal caregivers are your healthcare professionals, your assisted living staff and community companion care sitters. These are people that are formal caregivers. They do this for a living. But beyond formal caregivers, you have informal caregivers, which are family caregivers, people like yourself that have taken on the responsibility of caring for someone they love. And be it a spouse, a mother, a father. And the fastest growing rate of caregivers are millennials, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And so there are I would say 3 or 4 ways that COVID specifically has impacted the life of caregivers and caregiving in general, and especially within our community. And so when you think of the gaps that exist for healthcare and different aspects of our community, those things are accelerated when you're talking about diseases like Alzheimer's or situations like caregiving and a pandemic that has now hit the entire world. And so I would say the economics is the first area where COVID has truly impacted our community as caregivers. And I would also say around education and the emotional aspect of what it means to be a caregiver. There are so many different components under that. And I would also say from an empathic perspective, it has opened the door to reveal where we are as a community and beyond when it comes to the subject matter of caregiving and what that really looks like within the community, outside of the community, and how those that are outside of our living space respond to the needs of caregivers and their families. And so it's exposing some of those things as well.
Mm-hmm. And so can you talk about how that the challenges related to caregiving are kind of amplified by Alzheimer's as a disease?
Yeah. So, for example, and I'll just share just caregiving in general, caregiving within our community. What are some of the first things that we see economically when we talk about COVID? Mm-hmm. And then I can kind of, as a subcategory of that, talk about how an Alzheimer's or dementia-related caregiver is then impacted on top of all that, right? Okay. Because the needs are different. And so from a caregiving perspective, your speaker that came on earlier, tell me her name again?
Tammy.
Miss Tammy. Miss Tammy said it so beautifully when she talked about this intersection and this point of crisis when COVID happened, because she was in a situation where she had other people coming in to help in the care of her mother. And for many people within our community and outside of the caregiving, people within the caregiving community, whether within the Black community or otherwise, the first thing that went into paralysis was caregivers having the capacity to have access to help. And so immediately that help was disrupted. And so whether it was disrupted because it was already in play, or whether it was disrupted because of the fears of COVID, or for many people, we heard this all during COVID, the percentage and the level of people within the community, Black and brown people that are essential workers, and many essential workers that were dealing with COVID too, but they were also forced to be out working. And so when you throw in with that, that there are caregivers that are potentially essential workers as well, that are trying to care for a loved one at home. And then there are caregivers like myself that left the workplace in order to full-time care for a loved one. When the pandemic hit, access to that immediately, in some cases, stopped. And so that means you have this conflict in how am I going to support my family? How am I going to take care of my loved one? And now the fear of COVID coming into the home, or me getting COVID and bringing it into the home. And then you have the places that are professionals at being able to come into the home, like hospice workers and home care solution, home instead. These are people that are professional caregivers coming into the home. The issue of whether or not people are really doing their due diligence and protecting the homes that they're going into, because they're going into so many homes, that in and of itself creates an immediate economic impact to a family. And so it was a very visible impact. And so then right as a subset of that, we had a disbursement of finances that eventually went out into the communities in order to support this gap that was taking place among everyone in the workplace because of COVID, and caregivers were more often left out of that equation. And so we have consideration for children, we have consideration for many different things, but it was left up to states to determine whether or not any of that money would be allocated for caregivers or for caregiver support systems. So the economics has been dramatic when it comes to caregiving, and then even more so when it comes to caregiving within our own community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I mean, it's hard to imagine how lonely it must be to feel like, you know, I mean, but there's a lot of money being flushed into the system right now to support people who have been impacted by COVID. But I know that you've said specifically, like a lot of the government funds that are out there, the state of Louisiana isn't prioritizing caregivers and how to support caregivers. And so there are disproportionate changes that are affecting caregivers across different states, which is just so unfortunate. Can you talk a little bit about the biggest myths and misconceptions and oversight around caregiving during COVID or caregiving in general?
I think that I don't know that I would say it would be misconceptions. I would start by saying that caregivers are probably most invisible among so many different categories of helpers and communicators and people we have within our community. And so caregiving by its very nature causes caregivers to end up becoming very isolated. They're not isolated by choice, they're isolated by necessity because of how either caregivers are working full-time, trying to come home and care for a loved one, which is the case in our community and many communities. Or we have caregivers that are working full-time. And then when it comes to diseases such as, it's not only dementia, but when it comes to diseases such as Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia, there becomes a need for the caregiver to be present almost at all times. And the person can weaponize their home, they can have accidents that put them at risk and the home at risk and the person at risk because of cognition. And that's a very different experience than even someone who may be terminally ill with some other illness. And so for that reason, I don't know that there's a misconception, but by its very nature, caregivers become isolated by the function of what they're doing every day. And that isolation puts in jeopardy their ability to be able to reach out into the community or wherever they need for help. And sometimes caregivers don't always know exactly what they need because they're extremely overwhelmed and dealing with the emotional components of caregiving. In the case of COVID, I've talked to so many people during the time of COVID within our community and outside of our community that are just so overwhelmed with caregiving, their jobs, their kids, everything, that the thought of how do I protect my home when I'm caring for a loved one and someone from hospice or in-home health comes in, how do I protect my home so that I decrease the risk of putting my loved one at risk or me at risk when someone is coming to my home? And that's actually a part of the second piece of this, which is education. And the understanding of being able to, what do I do? How can I be more empowered as a caregiver caring for someone during COVID? And so, you know, I've had the opportunity to really do a lot of consulting and talking to people during COVID about basic things they could do to really lower the risk and make demands on the people that are coming into their homes, and setting protocols. You know, in the healthcare, we would call them protocols, but you can set protocols within your own home for how someone is to enter your home, what they need to do when they enter your home to lower the risk of you being at harm or your loved one being in harm.
And where can we get more information to learn about the type of protocols? Are there templates or examples of what those protocols could look like?
Yeah, I mean, I have a basic template that I used for myself that I've shared with other people. But just sharing a little bit about what that is, that's everything from, you know, when you think about what someone does when they enter into a hospital. So, you know, for your home, you can be as rigid as you need to be for someone to enter your home. So from everything from buying Hibiclens, which is right on Amazon, and someone comes into your home, the first thing they need to do is go to your bathroom and wash their hands with Hibiclens, which is an antiviral, antibacterial soap that should be used before anyone touches anyone in your home. I had people double masking when they came in my home, especially during that first wave. Now we're back there again. However, double masking. So I had masks, extra masks at the door. When people would come in, I had booties at the door. You can order all of this from Amazon. So people come into the home, I don't want people to bring germs into the home. So that means cover your feet, cover your hands. Here's fresh gloves at the door for you. Amazon, $12 a box of 350 gloves. And so those are just basic things that someone can do that really increase your odds of being safe when someone is coming into a caregiver's home. And for lack of education, you know, people within our community and some people outside of our community don't have access to some basic things that can be done so they feel empowered in the caregiver setting and not subject to what someone else wants to do coming into their home.
And now that we're on the verge of a new frontier,
yeah,
variant,
yeah.
How do you see things as we move into this next phase of COVID with the Delta variant and beyond?
Well, I think that first I want to say too that the time of COVID really exposed our empathy intelligence. I don't think that's a real phrase, but I'm making it up now, because in caregiving in general, you really learn where your support measures will come from and to whom will be supportive to you. I've talked to so many people that I'm an only child, which is extremely difficult. But family members that don't help, family members that are, you know, kind of into their own thing and primarily in denial about what is really taking place within the family unit. And so COVID has asked a lot of people. You know, we just talked about being vaccinated and kind of stepping out of what you would do for you, because now you're talking about your community, your home, your mom, your family, your kids. And so I would say first and foremost, we've stepped into a place that we're still extremely divided and will continue to be divided on different ways, right? And so that's number one. Going into a new variant and other variants that could follow does not leave us room to kind of step out of this division that we've already been heading towards. And so that is going to continue to be a challenge. The other thing, and I'm just such a big proponent of this, we have to educate ourselves. We can't leave it up to other people as caregivers and as community. We have to educate ourselves about COVID. We have to educate ourselves about caregiving. We have to educate ourselves and think about and process what it is that we need and want as individuals, right? And so that coming into this new, I don't want to say era, but this new phase that we're in is going to continue to challenge us. It's going to continue to challenge us to do our own due diligence, to follow our own instincts, and to prioritize the things that are really important in our life, to be honest with you. And I think that it's going to challenge us to really step up when it comes to how we look after each other. Because with caregiving and even with COVID within caregiving, nothing tests you like when the thing comes close to you or comes closest to you. And so a new variant or any variant after that or another pandemic down the road is going to continue to test us and push us to a place of really trying to bring us closer together and not split us and divide us to be farther apart.
Mm-hmm. And so on that note, I know that caregiving affects caregivers a great deal, but there's also kind of a downstream impact to the rest of the community. So I'm wondering, how faithful are you in the Alzheimer and caregiving epidemic getting better?
That's another potent question.
Mm-hmm.
From a caregiving perspective, the numbers are only growing. And so I'll talk caregiving, then COVID and caregiving, and then Alzheimer's as a subset to caregiving. And so from a caregiving perspective, we are entering a phase, a period where those people that are in that 40 to 50 range are going to be confronted with situations in their own life with their own parents as our parents age. And that is a real thing. By the numbers, we know that we have 43 million caregivers right now, family caregivers, informal caregivers. In the next 10 to 20 years, that number could potentially double. So we're talking about a caregiving crisis where people are unprepared, where people have done very potentially, and even within our community, I would love to see us get to a place within our community where we normalize end of life care, where we begin to, and I don't mean normalize it like we're comfortable with end of life, but where we begin to plan and talk about how our parents, how we want to live out our aging years. What do we want for our kids? It makes it better for your kids. And so from a caregiving perspective, these numbers are going to accelerate really fast. So within the next 10 years, you're going to have tens of millions of more caregivers in the situation that we're in now, which could be then another pandemic. Okay, and so now from not just the caregiving perspective, but caregiving and COVID perspective, if we don't prioritize at the governmental level, caregivers in such a way that at the community level, we begin to pierce the veil of helping community leaders understand why caregiving is impacting community. Because a lot of times these, in the business world, we talk about hidden costs. Caregiving creates hidden but potent impact, and not in a good way, in the workplace, within the community, within churches, everywhere. So the education at the community level is, it is an absolute necessity as these numbers increase, because the impact is going to continue to cut at the very root of what causes our community to grow and flourish. So I see that being a challenge. At the same time, the Alzheimer's conversation is simmering right underneath it and right with it, because of the rate of Alzheimer's growing and the rate of Alzheimer's, the needs of caregivers that are now becoming Alzheimer's caregivers. the insurance industry has orchestrated things in such a way that many of the costs that are needed and the affiliated with Alzheimer's care is not covered. And so by being non-medical expenses, we have now a push and a demand being placed on organizations that do formal caregiving, like in-home care, home instead. And the cost of caring for someone at home has gone from $130,000 a year in 2016 and 17 to now $250,000 a year to care for someone with Alzheimer's at home. And so the impact now with the pandemic, the impact of these organizations, not because hospice workers are not just caring for people with Alzheimer's, they're caring for anyone that is within. So the demand on mental health professionals, the demand on hospice, the demand on in-home health services is going to continue to accelerate on top of all the other numbers. There are peaks and rays of light within it at the community level, relational level with other people. But at the same time, it's a sobering thought to think about 10 years from now, 80 to 90% of the beds in a hospital are going to be filled with someone with Alzheimer's. It's really not a good place to be, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be grim. I don't mean to be grim because it's not all grim, but.
Are you sure?
Well, it's not all grim because we have these heroic caregivers that are making sacrifices in every way to care for their loved ones. And listen to the story that we just heard. And we have caregivers willing to leave their jobs and do everything they can to keep their loved ones safe. And when caregivers come in contact with other caregivers, there is a healing and a potency and an impact that takes place. And we have organizations that are aware of that. I think what I'm saying is that there's the piece that doesn't look great, but then there's the piece that we got to hook on to all the pieces that are sparking transformation within communities. So if we can get leaders to kind of understand how this impacts their community, we'd be in a much better place,
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, the economic impact that you mentioned, and how that will be threefold for communities of color, unfortunately, because, with all the systemic challenges, faced by communities of color and the real estate that we own for those who own real estate and the level of growth seen in underrepresented communities for real estate. And we talk about the burden of debt that young Black and Brown men and women have as they exit their youth into adulthood, burdened by college debt. And then I think about the sandwich. I don't know if it's called a sandwich generation, but if millennials are the fastest growing caregivers, and those people are expected to have children, and having children is what supports and keeps our economy propped up, because right now we see a decline or almost, I think, a stalemate in terms of the amount of births that we're having. All that really snowballs into a huge economic impact because you have to decide between caring for your kids and you're caring for your own future with caring for your loved ones. And you start to have to make trade-offs and, and that doesn't serve anyone well when we're talking about making trade-offs for elderly care and elder health. And then, when we make those trade-offs in relation to our retirement or our children. So I can see, I know it's not supposed to be grim, but I think I'm inspired by leaders like you who can help us think through it and hopefully rally for the type of policy changes that need to be made to support caregivers, because I think that the indirect impact to the community can be devastating.
100%. And I think to your point, I think when one of the things that I've experienced myself recently is this decision about gaining hospice care, hospice help. And even though my mother is still in a position where she's ambulatory, she can do some things on her own. One of the things that I really hope to do, especially within our community, because there's more of a resistance to it within our community, and even emphasized in this time of COVID, are two things. For people that are caring for a loved one in their homes, to emphasize during COVID, to emphasize the importance of looking into palliative care as well as hospice care, depending on where their loved one is. And I say this because hospice is not like what people think it's not like what people think it is, and it's not like what it used to be. And so hospice is not where you get hospice because my loved one's about to die. It's not like that. Hospice is a choice that you make for how you are also wanting to see your loved one live the rest of their life in whatever state they're in. And there are really good hospice companies out there that are abiding by very strong COVID protocols. They are really people that are called to do the work that they do. And so even though they're in many homes, I've had a good experience so far with hospice for months. And it brings a level of, it doesn't take away all the economic pressure, but what hospice can do is there are many things that become covered when you're in hospice, economically, financially, that are not covered when you are doing it in your own insurance. And so depending on, in our community, I feel so passionate about it because we steer away from things that we don't really understand, or things that frighten us. And for me, I made a decision because I couldn't worry about the name. I had to worry about what was going to support me and my mother. And so things like hospice, palliative care, those kinds of resources are so important to our community because those resources can come in and help. Social workers come in, you have nurse aides that come in, and all of this stuff is covered by Medicare. And so it could have kind of it can have an impactful result in the pockets of people day to day that are caregivers and people within our community.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that final bit about some ways to think strategically around how you provide care for your loved ones. We're coming close to the end, and I feel like we have so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
The time flew by.
Yeah.
So Deborah, can you share with everyone before we disconnect, if they have questions about caregiving, or they'd like to strategize or need solutions related to caregiving, is there a way for them to reach out to your organization to get more support?
Yes, I mean, well, first, they can go to hc3d.org, which is where all of our resources and information is on, and things to come that we're doing for family caregivers. Our goal is really to make life better for family caregivers. That's, I mean, as simplistic as it could be, it is probably the most impactful thing that any organization can do right now. And we have information about education that's coming that caregivers could be a part of as we move forward in the coming months. And then with that, we have community partners from Florida to Nashville that we work with on various other things, such as I just spoke with one of our partners last week, who is primarily focused on helping caregivers who are making decisions about finances and elder care and all of these things. And this person is a true consultant in helping families as best she can that are at that intersection of making that decision so that they know the right questions to ask and the right things to do. For us as an organization, we do that as well. And we can be reached at info@hc3d.org is where anyone can contact us so that we can help them ourselves or even put them in touch with others that are partners of ours that can help them figure out all of this COVID world and caregiving world and all of that put together.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that information, and thank you so much for sharing with us just really, I think, the tip of the iceberg of what it means to be a caregiver and what does it mean to have to deal with caregiving in the age of COVID. I also want to thank again Tammy Curry for coming on and sharing her story related to her experiences with not only COVID-19, but her decisions around getting vaccinated and also caring for her mother. I want to thank Venture Café for providing this platform for us and giving us this opportunity to be able to share these stories and experiences that really help champion communities of color and helping us to be better and to grow despite living through the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks, everyone. If you want to know more about Colors of COVID, please visit us at colorsofcovid.org. And stay tuned for our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.